Hello and welcome to the Bio360 podcast. Water, color and light are key elements to what we call life. Great human beings have been reflecting upon these topics from the ancient Greeks to Viktor Schauberger, Goethe and others. Yet modern science seems to have lost interest in what all surrounds us and what gives us life. My guest is not only an exception, but he is a true pioneer and explorer when it comes to our understanding of water and light. He discovered nothing less than the fourth phase of water beyond solid, liquid and vapor. Please welcome with me the professor of bioengineering and my personal hero, Professor Dr. Gerald Pollack. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, Onkas. It's really my pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
And so it's my pleasure. As I said in the intro, you're my hero because I have started like 15 years ago, more or less. I have stumbled upon the topics of water and light and all the anomalies of water and what makes it move in the body and the function of the heart and this kind of stuff. And I've been like in the void because there was nothing. I was only looking in German and I couldn't find any more information than what I had already found. And that changed a few years ago when I started to look into the English-speaking world. And all of a sudden, I had access to your knowledge and came across your books and your podcasts and speeches and so forth. So I'm completely,
I'm flattered. Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind comments. Please go on.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about something really interesting, but maybe you can just introduce yourself like quite quickly.
Okay. I guess you know my name by now. I've been at the University of Washington in Seattle for 50 years. Just now is exactly the 50th anniversary. I started my career studying muscles. I was interested in the molecular mechanism of muscle contraction. And there's a theory that has been out there for many, many years, more than 50 years, maybe now 60 years, and put forth by the great Nobel laureate, Sir Andrew Huxley. And he was the hero of many people. He won the Nobel Prize. He was knighted by the Queen, Sir Andrew Huxley. He was president of the Royal Society. Every conceivable distinction. Unfortunately, the evidence didn't fit his theory, and we gathered more and more evidence that also failed to fit the theory. And so we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how muscles really did work rather than a theory that didn't fit the evidence. And one thing occurred to me one day, and that is all the theories of muscle contraction, of all the variants on the main theory, nobody considered the role of water. Actually, there was one Israeli scientist who did, but people didn't pay a whole lot of attention to him. And muscles are 2/3 water, and if you do a count, a molecule by molecule count, that is, if you line up all the molecules that are inside a muscle and you start counting. Well, 99% of them, more than 99%, are actually water molecules, because in order to make up that 2/3 volume of water, since the water molecules are so small, you need a lot of them. And if you do the count, as I said, it turns out more than 99%. And it occurred to me that how is it possible that any theory of muscle contraction that could be on the right track, how is it possible that water could be ignored? I mean, you're ignoring 99 out of 100 of the molecules and saying they don't count. It's as though the muscle proteins are functioning in a vacuum. Doesn't make any sense, but that's the way it was treated. And so this was the beginning of our turn to water. And I was hugely impressed by the work of one Gilbert Ling. And Gilbert Ling, by now, I think he's 99 years old and alive and kicking, kicking loudly, if that's part of his character. And by now he's written, I think, 6 or 7 books, and mostly they're on the same theme, and that is the water that exists inside the cell. And he argued, cogently, I thought, that the water molecules inside the cell, they're not like water in a glass. They're actually all lined up in a certain way next to the proteins and other macromolecules inside the cell. And this was at a kind of turning point in my career. I was getting a bit frustrated that the muscle field was hardly moving. It seemed that no matter what the evidence, investigators in the field maintain their allegiance to this theory, which seemed to me, and also many observers outside the field, once they hear the evidence, to be bankrupt, defunct. And so I was ready to open my mind to the idea that water might be involved in the contraction of muscle. And that's what started our entree into studying the fundamental properties of muscle and of water, I should say. First as applied to muscle, but very soon as applied to all of nature. Yeah. As you know, because water is everywhere.
Exactly. I was just yesterday talking with Dr. Alexander Wunsch. Maybe you know him about light biology and these kind of topics, and we were discussing that we ignore the light, we ignore the water around us, we ignore, when we look at the body, we ignore the fascia, we ignore so many things that we take for granted and say like it's easy, it's like there's nothing about it, and yet it's the most abundant thing in the universe or on our planet, and it's the most abundant thing in ourselves. And I think
true.
Yeah, I think that will tell us something about its importance.
I think it was the great Nobelist Albert St. Georgi who discovered vitamin C and had a deep interest in water. He had many quotable quotes, and one of them was that the water is the last thing that the fish would ever notice. There's so much around, and it's so common that you don't pay any attention to it. It's like the air that we breathe. Who pays attention to the air that we breathe?
Yeah, exactly.
He was also deeply interested in water, and as a pioneer and a Nobel laureate among Nobel laureates, the father of modern biochemistry, as many people put it. He had one quote that is perhaps the most quoted of all, and that is, "Life is water dancing to the tune of solids." And so he knew that water was centrally involved in anything to do with biology. Unfortunately, many scientists have stopped paying attention to water until very recently. I think there's been an upsurge in interest in water.
Yeah. Maybe we're coming to this to some other researchers. I personally came across books of this German guy. I told you before about him, Wilfried Hachenay, and nobody knows him even in Germany. Like, it's not well known, but I bought all his books and I just got my hands on them like 2 days ago. And on page 50 on one of the books, he says, that he thinks there's a false phase of water and its nature would be electric. And
really?
And he also told me in like a speech he held, he said like that the human heart is it's impossible to pump the blood around 2 to 2.5 times around the planet. And I'm going to talk a little bit with you about that, and I'm going to talk with Dr. Thomas Cowan about that. So that's all started my fascination, and that's why I'm so happy to have you here. So Jerry, I have 5 hours worth of questions, and so we gotta like compress it to 1 hour. If you would meet somebody in an elevator and have to make like an elevator pitch, like, and explain him like in 30 seconds, what is the false phase of water and why should we care about it? How would you do that?
I better check my watch. 30 seconds. Okay.
For a minute.
Fourth phase is in between a liquid and a solid. It's charged. It's built by light. and it's the water that fills our body. Therefore, if you really want to understand how the body works, there's no way to do it unless you understand the water, which is the principal component of our body. Is that 30 seconds?
Yeah, kind of.
Well, the fourth phase is a liquid crystalline phase where the molecules are all lined up. You see, typically you have a glass of water, and the molecules inside, the water molecules, are randomly disposed and bouncing around at many, many, many times per second. But the liquid crystalline phase is different. The molecules are not randomly disposed and not bouncing around at a huge number of times per second. They're stable, moderately stable. And in fact, you can take these stable molecules and actually, this is in between a liquid and a solid, but you can actually, an Italian group has succeeded in making a solid out of it, a solid at room temperature. So this is solid water at room temperature. It's like ice, but it's created at room temperature. And this is the fourth phase.
Yeah. So that's a major discovery. There's a fourth phase of water, and it existed all the time, and nobody saw it. One of the questions that comes into my mind, like, how is it possible that nobody else has discovered it before?
Well, somebody else has discovered it. Besides, how you pronounce Hachenai?
Yep, he hasn't discovered it. He just made assumptions and thought about it.
Well, there are others who made assumptions and thought about it, and they thought about it because there are so many anomalies of water. And what are anomalies? Anomalies are properties that don't fit the existing theory, and it's really easy to dismiss them and put them on a table of anomalies and then say, okay, well, it's just an anomaly. But what that really means is that all of these anomalies don't fit the theory. And so when the number of anomalies grows so large, right now I think it's somewhere between 60 and 70, if I remember correctly. There's a website that so when it grows so large, then it's inevitable that there's something wrong with the theory. You can't just have an infinite list of anomalies, and that's what prompted some people, even 100 years ago, to suggest that there's a fourth phase. But now, as I mentioned, Gilbert Ling did provide evidence for. He didn't call it a fourth phase of water. He called it structured water. Some people still use that term. Some people call it ordered water. We tend to call it fourth phase water for no particular reason. We did find that the structure of the water was different from what Gilbert Ling had proposed. But I think it's not fair to say that nobody has provided evidence for it. There have been many people. It's just that the scientific community hasn't paid attention to these findings. That's all. Yeah. Another one was the late Mei-Wan Ho, who also had evidence for. She didn't call it a fourth phase, but an ordered phase of water.
Yeah. So you talked about organized structure. How does the water actually organize, and where does this fourth phase of water? You also call it easy water. It's means exclusion zone. Where does it form, and how? What is that structure that it's actually getting then?
It forms next to so-called hydrophilic surfaces. Not everyone, but many of them, if not most. Hydrophilic means water-loving, and you can characterize surfaces like that as if you have the surface in a horizontal plane and you dropped a droplet of water on it, the water would spread out. Unlike hydrophobic surfaces, where the water beads up, for example, Teflon, those surfaces don't create easy water or fourth phase water, but the hydrophilic surfaces do. And what happens is that when water meets such a surface, the molecules of water that are immediately adjacent to the surface transform themselves into this ordered fourth phase. And it's not just the one molecular layer, it's many molecular layers, and our experiments show that the number of molecular layers can be up to millions. If our evidence is correct, and I have every reason to believe it's correct, it can grow to millions of molecular layers.
Is it actually layers? Like, can I just imagine that, like one layer and then another one on top and another one on top, or is that just the picture that you use for it?
I think it's. I think layers is appropriate because the way it forms, at least according to our evidence, is that a sheet forms, the first sheet next to the hydrophilic surface, that is, the water is transformed. And once the first sheet forms, then a second sheet forms on top of that, and a third sheet. And so once all of this happens, and typically it can take 5 or 10 minutes for all these sheets to build. It takes roughly, I think we calculated 1,000th of a second per sheet, just roughly, next to many of the surfaces. Once it forms, it's like a crystal. As I said, a liquid crystal. It has a honey-like or raw egg white-like character to it. If you look at the sheet from on an axis that's perpendicular to the plane of the sheet, you'll see hexagons, a wide array of hexagons. And then the next sheet, as it forms, is again the same hexagons, but shifted very slightly from the first one in order to make them stick together. And the next one is the same. And when you add up all these sheets, you have that is the fourth phase. We call it EZ because it stands not in Germany, it's EZ, I guess, but in English, it's really easy to say EZ because it's easy to remember. And it's exclusion zone because as a crystal, like other crystals, it excludes virtually everything from inside. So, when you make ice, for example, that's another type of water crystal. And the structure of this, by the way, is not so different from ice. It's pretty close, but not the same. When ice forms, as the crystal forms, it pushes out all of the impurities, and so you get a pure crystal. You can't have a pure crystal if the crystal has impurities in it. And so the EZ is very effective at pushing out solutes and particles. And we've studied that in considerable detail. So that's why we call it EZ, exclusion zone, because it excludes. It's really not a great name because it merely describes one feature of this zone. It would be better if we had adopted some other nomenclature, which referred more directly to the fact that this was an ordered phase of water.
Okay. To make that clear, hydrophilic structures are, for example, our veins and arteries, proteins, but we talk even about things like droplets or bubbles, or there's like so many things that are actually having EZ around them. So water turns from in the proximity to these surfaces, it actually morphs from H2O to H3O2.
That's correct.
Into this
formula of this ordered phase.
Yeah. Yes. So into this honeycomb structure, and it eliminates everything, all particles that are inside. Actually, there's practical uses for that. For example, you can filter water. Maybe we can come to that later. Sure. But there's another really important thing that I want to come to, and that is the charge. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, sure. So the water molecule, as people know, was H2O or otherwise H plus OH minus, and which equals H2O. So we found through many experiments that the way that this particular water builds is that the water molecule basically breaks up into the OH minus and the H plus. And the OH minus is built into those hexagonal sheets. The hexagonal sheet forms from OH minuses that stick together. Meanwhile, the H plus is left lonely, sitting in the water beyond the EZ and just sits there. And so you have, as the EZ forms, it carries the negative charge, and the positive charge is beyond the EZ left in the water. So as as this builds up, you have an increased separation of charge. It's kind of like a battery, and you want to charge your cell phone battery. You stick it into a receptacle, and it gets charged. And the charge is basically the separating plus and minus in the rechargeable battery, and then that energy can get used. And the process is much the same. As easy water builds, inevitably it carries negative charge, and the region beyond carries positive charge. There are some exceptions, but I think probably you have many more questions, and so we don't need to get into it. But it's like a battery, and this battery, it seems more and more the evidence that this battery is a source of energy for your body, just like your battery is, your cell phone battery is the source of energy, temporarily, for your smartphone.
Yeah. So I got in my veins, for example, I got around the structure, I got the negatively charged easy water, and inside I got the positively charged bulk water or blood.
Yep.
Which repel each other, and we can maybe later talk about that, if that might have something to do with blood flow. But can I actually measure that charge? Can I just take my multimeter, maybe a more advanced one in the lab, and just put the diodes in and measure how much it is?
Yeah, you can do that if you have the proper electrodes. A simpler way is to measure the pH, and the simplest way to do that is to use something like litmus paper. It turns color when you stick it in. Acids one color, bases another color, and so on. Yeah. All the gradation of colors, and the same chemicals that are put into the paper, the litmus paper, to give you that capacity, they come soluble. In other words, dissolved in water. And so you can take a little droplet of that stuff and put it into whatever you're studying, and the local pH value is given by the color, and we use that all the time. You can compare it to an ordinary pH meter, and it basically gives the same result, but it's really easy. It's so easy to use it because seeing a color is so simple. So anybody who has access to those pH sensitive dyes, and you can get them from any chemical company, can measure the pH. It's really easy, and measure the separation of charge. But yeah,
maybe not many people know actually that there is a relationship between pH and charge, and there's guys like Jerry Tennant, for example. He talks a lot about these things, and for example, he claims that six cells have always a less negatively charged, like a lack of easy water. In your terms, is that correct?
No, that's absolutely correct, and this is so critically important because. Well, let me back up a step. So those people who know something about cell biology or biochemistry and such will know that if you stick an electrode into a cell, any cell, you get a negative electrical potential, implying negative charge that's inside the cell. And the prevailing view as to why the cell has this negative charge is that the membrane that surrounds the cell is pumping ions, certain ions out of the cell and other ions into the cell, and there are also special channels for these ions to flow. And somehow, when you add all this together, the cell becomes negative. There are reasons to doubt this theory. One of them is that if you take a gel instead of a cell, and the gel is just like the inside of the cell, but it contains no membrane. So if the membrane were responsible for this negative electrical potential, then you'd guess that a system that has no membrane wouldn't have it. But if you stick the same electrode that you stuck into the cell, you stick it into the gel, you also measure minus 100, minus 150 millivolts, same as the cell, essentially. And so that's one reason, and there are more, one reason why I think that theory is not correct. Another simpler theory is that the reason the cell has negative electrical potential is that the water inside the cell is easy water, and easy water has negative charge. So obviously, if you take a sack of some sort and fill it with contents that have negative charge, and you stick an electrode, and you're going to measure a negative electrical potential. And then we come to Jerry Tennant, And his contention, and that's confirmed in the literature, that sick cells have less negative electrical potential. Well, in our terms, what that means is it has less easy water. It's deficient in water. And easy water is necessary for everything the cell does. Every protein in the cell is surrounded by easy water because, well, easy water is what makes up the water inside the cell. And in order to get function in a cell, it's basically, it centers on the protein. But it's not just the protein, it's the protein plus the easy water that surrounds the protein. That's the normal state. And when proteins undergo a folding from, let's say, an extended to a contracted state, that's the function of the cell. Like, for example, in a muscle cell, you will get some protein folding that is responsible for the muscle contraction. In a nerve cell, you'll get a different kind of protein conformational change or folding. Again, that's responsible in this case for information transmission, et cetera, et cetera. The protein, but actually it's the proteins in the water are responsible. If you don't have the water or enough water, the protein finds itself in a state, an unusual state, and the proteins don't know what to do in this unusual state. And instead of folding to give rise to function, it will, say, misfold and give rise to pathological function or no function. And so the easy water, which is, you might say, the equivalent of hydration, easy water is absolutely critical for function. And so sick cells, if they have less easy water, they're going to be sick, and they will have not as much negativity, not as much easy water, not as much negativity inside the cell. So I think I'm right on with Jerry Tennant and his pioneering work. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So does the cell actually get energy from the easy water?
Yes, I think it does because it constitutes potential energy. You can imagine you've got a bag, and the bag is full of negative charges, and negative charges repel each other. They want to get away from one another, and this is potential energy, ready to be unleashed. And I think the evidence that we have is that this energy is unleashed to help with protein folding, and so this is the energy, or at least this is part of the energy that drives the work of the cell. Everybody says it's ATP, and it's not widely known, but in Gilbert Ling's books, he brings up the concept of when the high energy bond of ATP was first elaborated. Another paper came out soon after that saying the guys who discovered this made a mistake, and it was a mistake that people, unless you were an expert in the field, you wouldn't see it. But they challenged the point of view, and Gilbert Ling brings up this challenge and reminds the reader that nobody has ever commented on the challenge. People have simply accepted the idea that ATP is the high energy bond, and the ATP stores the energy for everything that we do.
There might be something else than only biochemistry happening in our cells, and even as like an adolescent, I would question that, like a piece of bread that I take in the morning with some spread or something like that can actually make me laugh, write poets, dance, make love, or whatever. You know, that kind of, it just doesn't fit in my understanding, in my intuition, that this actually is giving me all that energy to do everything I'm actually capable of. So.
Well, let me challenge that. Why not? Why would you think that electrical energy has a higher capacity to do that? I'm with you, but I'm just tickling.
I'm talking about the biochemistry that the creation of ATP from a piece of bread is not enough to actually make me run. That brings me to the next question: how is actually easy water created? What is actually making it?
This is a wonderful question. Thank you for asking. So we have the same question, and we scratched our collective heads for a long time figuring out where the energy came from, because you can't get something for nothing, right? If you want to charge your cell phone battery, you plug it in. and you get the electrical energy that comes from other kinds of energy. You know, it's a chain. You get the electrical energy to charge your battery and such, and so separating charge and creating order, which is what we're talking about, you can't get that from nothing. You need energy to do it. In nature, in order to build order from chaos, you must put in energy. And a good example of that is cleaning up your office. You know, your office gets messy as is my office. And in order to declutter and to organize stuff, I need to take some time and energy to do it. And it's the same thing with essentially all of nature. If you want to go from chaos to order, you must put in energy. It's a fundamental tenet of thermodynamics. And so we knew that there had to be energy from somewhere in order to separate the charge and build order, and we couldn't figure it out. Finally, the person who sort of helped us figure it out is one of the many undergraduate students that we have working in the laboratory. They like to come in the lab because it's kind of a free-thinking place, and they can express their creativity. But I tend to I give them a choice of 2 or 3 projects, and the idea is they should do them. But this guy didn't do it. He didn't follow my orders, so to speak. And he had a chamber on the bench, and he was looking at the exclusion zone, 4th phase water, next to Nafion, next to a polymer of some sort, which is our standard. And he saw a lamp sitting over on his right side. It was a gooseneck lamp. And he thought, hey, let me shine this on the chamber and see what happens. And he called me in to show me. It was really astounding, because the region of the exclusion zone that received the light grew. It didn't just grow by 10%. It grew by a factor of like 3 times or something like that. Huge. And when he took the lamp away, the growth then receded back to the original. And so it didn't take a genius to figure out that you shine a lamp and the EZ grows, that maybe light the photon energy is responsible for the growth of the EZ. And we studied that, and we obviously, did serious experiments on it. And we found that indeed it was light that is responsible, and particularly infrared light, and particularly around the wavelength of 3,000 nanometers or so. So yes, long answer to a short question. Light is responsible. Light is the energy. Photon energy causes EZ to build. So you're not getting something for nothing. If your body is actually using this electrical energy to power function, then the energy has to come from somewhere. It can't just come from nowhere, and it comes from light. Now, I know you have a zillion questions, but let me just make one more point, that infrared light is all around us. Most of us, when we think of infrared, we think of either the toaster or the electrical oven. We look at the coils and they glow a bright orange, and the heat comes out, and we kind of say, oh, it's generating a lot of infrared energy. So infrared is generally associated with heat, but that's not exactly correct, not exclusively. Everything around us is generating infrared energy. If you were sitting in your office right now, if you were to turn off all the lights and draw the shades up so they're blocking the outside light, and try with your smartphone to take a photograph, you get nothing, because it's really dark in there. Your eyes can see nothing, and your camera can see nothing. But if you had an infrared camera with a sensor that's responsive to infrared wavelengths, you get a beautiful image of everything, because everything around you is generating infrared energy. It's not just the coils of the toaster. It's everything. Of course, the coils will generate more, but everything is generating infrared energy, and that's why it's used as energy can be used at night as a nighttime viewer, of course, used in military and other applications. So what I mean to say is that the energy that's responsible for building EZ water is all around us. It's there all the time.
Which is good. Which is good news, because if it would be like sunlight, direct sunlight, then the lack of sunlight, we would have a lack of EZ like right away. But the sun actually gives its warmth to us like all the time, and it gets reflected from the entire Earth and so forth. So we have it all the time. We just had the idea, like, what if I go to like minus 40 degree? I'm still able to get infrared radiation.
Yes, you are. Yeah, I mean, you'd have to go to 0 degrees Kelvin, absolute zero, in order to eliminate the infrared. And it's pretty hard to do experiments at that temperature, because obviously the water would be totally frozen. So yes, it's always there, even at low temperatures. If you add more infrared, like sitting in a sauna, where there's heat and infrared, then the EZ grows bigger. And
sunshine also?
Sorry?
Sunshine also?
Yeah, sunshine contains infrared. Obviously, most of sunshine is in the visible range, but there's some UV and there's some infrared at the two ends of the solar spectrum. So yes, of course that contributes. And the Earth also generates infrared. It might be infrared generated from the molten core of the Earth, if that exists. Nobody's been there to find out. Or it may be that the energy is absorbed from the sun and it gets re-radiated, for example, at night. And so it's all around us. You can't get rid of it. And I think we're fortunate for that. Otherwise,
yeah,
we'd be devoid of EZ water.
Yeah. Okay. So we have now identified the source. The source is light, infrared light, warmth, and we have it everywhere. And so we're kind of always plugged in, and we can even plug in ourselves like even more. But that's good news, because then that explains like how this negative charge is then actually formed. Although I still don't understand like exactly why it is forming that negative charge. Maybe you can expand on that.
Well, I can, but I would probably need some diagrams. I'll give you a two-liner, but let me say that there's a chapter in my book. It's called The Fourth Phase of Water. It's become popular. It's in German, by the way.
We got it in German, yeah.
Different name, but very, very good translation, I'm told, and it describes it in detail. But so. Just a capsule, and again, please forgive me, without diagrams, it's not so easy, but what happens is you start with either a surface or some previously built layers of EZ water, and then you have a water molecule, and the water molecule is like a dipole, and it's got the oxygen is negative and the hydrogens are positive. And so in the right configuration, if you approach the water molecule from a certain direction, what you'll see is a minus and a plus. And this dipole, then if it's near an existing EZ, what happens is it will look for opposite charges. So if you have, let's say, a minus on top and positive at the bottom, it's going to look for a positive at the top and a negative at the bottom and latch on. It sticks on because those two charges see their opposites and they want to stick. And once they stick, the bonding pattern of that water molecule changes enough so as to release one of the pluses, one of the hydrogens, and that's released into the regular or bulk water. And so that's molecule by molecule, that's how the EZ builds. And it's very natural. It doesn't require anything exotic. It's just basic electrostatic theory. Plus is attracted to minus, and minus is attracted to plus. That's all.
I would like to get into some of the practical applications of it. And before we start with that, actually, you mentioned it's kind of a free energy. Isn't that something that we can use even in a bigger scale, like beyond the body?
Totally. So you can imagine that if you put one electrode in the negative EZ and another electrode in the positive water beyond the EZ, you have a potential difference. And if you connect this potential difference to a load. It could be a motor, it could be a light bulb, anything that uses electricity.
So you can run a light bulb like an LED from it?
Yes, we've done that. It's on some of my some of the podcasts that have videos or some slide presentations. I tend to show it many times, so we know it works. And
it doesn't sound it takes so much to make like actually like a decent energy machine out of it.
Yeah, well, Uncas, it's not so simple. We've demonstrated it in the laboratory. It works very well, but to make it practical, you need to demonstrate that you can build up the energy so that you get a lot of energy, not just the amount that you could get in the laboratory. That's a challenge, and these kinds of challenges are not so simple. We have a company that we started that is developing not only energy harvesting from light, which is actually, it's so simple, it just uses water, which is renewable, but also filtration. And the limiting factor in all of this, we're making good progress, but the limiting factor in all of this is getting enough investment money to tackle the technological challenges. So the company is called the fourth phase in INC, for the number 4.
Okay, so you're already on it, because that might be the future. That sounds like the ultimate solar panel.
I think so, because it doesn't deplete the Earth of its natural resources. You don't
exactly.
need semiconductor material. It's just water. So, I think it has huge potential.
And it opens up a new way of thinking also, Once you start with that, then other things will fall into place, and it's going to be a shift in thinking, how we understand life on Earth, energy, and human biology. So how can I actually increase the amount of easy water in my body? Is that actually something I'm looking for, or is easy water always in the perfect state in my body and I don't have to actually care?
No, you absolutely can do that. So there are a half dozen simple ways to do it. Just quickly, I mentioned sauna. You go into the sauna, your muscles are aching, you've got a headache, you're tired, whatever, and you absorb the heat, which is basically absorbing the infrared energy, and that infrared energy builds easy water, you see, and you feel good when you get out. I've had this experience myself in Finland and Russia, and it really works. And I think the reason it works is beyond just psychological. It's that absorbing all this infrared energy builds easy water, especially in places where it's deficient. It builds up, and then you function better. So that's one simple one.
Yeah. Okay. So that's still radiation. What is about like taking external sources of easy water? Thinking of, for example, food, vegetables, fruit, or what is actually with other waters like spring water, like vortex water, energized water, this kind of stuff. Is that actually, if I have like a nice spring, is that actually containing already some sort of easy, and do I want to take that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, spring waters vary depending on what's in them, but
Sure.
I've seen evidence. I don't need to go into detail about how we measure it, but it's not so complicated, that many of the spring waters contain a large fraction of easy water. It may have something to do with the pressure that drives the buildup of easy water. It may have something to do with the minerals inside this water, but many of them contain easy water, and many of them are known for years, for millennia, to have curative properties. So yes, absolutely, that's one. Foods, well, the food, especially green plants. So I think many of your listeners will know about green juicing, where you take a green plant and you squeeze it and squeeze out the juice. So what is this juice that you're squeezing out? Well, the juice is the water that sits inside the plant cells. It, too, has easy water inside. And and probably a hefty amount of easy water because these are fresh, newly grown plants. And so if you drink this stuff, it's not so easy to drink because it tastes awful. But if you add some strawberries or something like that, they're palatable. And many of the many of the naturopaths and we say alternative medicine people, the first thing that they do when a patient comes in is they say, you should drink this juice from green plants. It's easy to do, and you can do it. It doesn't cost a whole lot, and this will make you better. And the reports I hear is that, indeed, no matter what the initial problem is, the initial health problem, they come back a couple of months later. They've lost weight. This is a side effect. And they feel better. Doesn't matter what the issue is. And I think the reason they feel better is that they're basically drinking easy water. They're drinking the fuel that they need to power their cells, and especially the cells that are functioning inadequately. You've got some kind of syndrome. This water makes its way to those sites and rebuilds the easy water. So
and reduces a negatively charge, and so the cell becomes healthy again. And we focus on the chlorophyll, we focus on the minerals, and we think like the green juice, it has all these capacities, which it surely has, but maybe the driving factor is in that kind of green juice or fruit juice or whatever it is actually something else, and it's the easy water. You said like when you squeeze out something, there's water coming out of that. If I squeeze any part of my body, no water comes out, and yet you just said with 70% water in volume and 99% of the molecules are water. Is that because of easy? And why does it come out in the fruit?
Well, it doesn't come out in your body. So, for example, if you cut yourself, if the water inside your cells was a liquid, like liquid water, it would pour out when you cut yourself because you cut.
I've never seen that.
Well, it can happen because the water is easy water and it has gel-like character. You see, and so the gel doesn't come out. If you have gelatin dessert and you cut it, the water doesn't come pouring out. It stays inside because the water is easy water, and the easy water is basically stuck onto the solids inside the cell, and so it stays in. But I think I'm deviating from your question. What was the original question that you?
Yeah. Anyway, it's you already answered it. We're in the kind of practical things, like we were talking about juicing, and if I can get easy from food, and the question is, do I actually really want to take that in on a regular basis? That's something that you would recommend to just build up my negative charge in my whole body and then to get healthier from that?
I think so. I think I've never seen clinical studies on it, but anecdotal studies certainly suggest that. And the reason it comes out of the plant is that you're exerting pressure on the plant. You're basically tearing up the plant and squeezing out this kind of gel-like water, which has a consistency of kind of like raw egg white. And so that's the majority of what you're squeezing out. That's why you can get it, because of the squeezing.
For me, the whole thing is like, I mean, anything you study in biology, chemistry, about the world, actually, the more I get into the details, the more complicated it gets. Yet I have the feeling the easier the things are getting, the more we're actually coming to the truth. That is something that I always felt my entire life. So I was going actually from one level to another level of a deeper understanding. And the easier things are getting, I have the feeling we're getting more to the truth. When it comes to health, we're talking about tens of thousands of diseases, and there's so many factors, and nutrition and poison and toxins, and there's so much stuff to consider. And of course, in my podcast, I talk about a lot of these things. But the question I want to raise is it all that complicated? Or is it actually down to something as easy water?
Well, you're asking perhaps a person with a lot of bias. For years, the philosophical view of science stems from Occam's razor, the Occam's razor principle, which actually came from Newton. Occam was talking about the existence of God, and I think he was 14th century or 13th century or something, and he came up with a principle that if you want to find out whether God exists, if you have two hypotheses regarding the existence of God, the simpler one is likely to be the one that prevails. And Newton knew about this principle of simplicity, and he converted into a scientific principle, saying that if you have two hypotheses about how things work, one is complicated, the other is simple, the simpler one is likely to be the one that's correct. And that principle pervaded science up until roughly 100 years ago. 100 years ago, we had relativity, we had quantum mechanics, and intuition kind of disappeared in science. These concepts are, especially quantum mechanics, is mathematics. It's abstract mathematics, and there's no intuition that's behind us, which means it's not simple. Usually, when we think of simplicity, we think of cause and effect. So my entire career is motivated by an attempt to find simplicity. If you have a complicated hypothesis, every experiment that you do will be hard to interpret, because if the complicated idea about nature is not correct, and I agree with you that very few of these complicated ideas are destined to be correct, then you'll never get simple explanations to experiments. So it looks as though science becomes increasingly complicated, and I think the most noble pursuit is to look for simplicity. I feel that, of course, I'm unbiased, but I feel that the discovery of fourth phase water or easy water is actually simple. And I think, and I've demonstrated in my book, that it leads to so many simple interpretations of everyday phenomena that we don't even pay attention to, that I feel it's destined to be correct. And I really do wish that scientists would revert to this time-honored principle of going for simplicity instead of complexity. But it seems they don't. Many of my colleagues will stand up at a lecture, present something extremely complicated, and the underlying theme is, look how smart I am to be able to understand complexity, And
exactly.
I think quite the opposite.
Yeah.
So if there's any plea that I would make, it's a plea toward simplicity and toward cause and effect simplicity. A causes B, B causes C, and so on. And you can trace the logic and look for the underlying simple principles. That's science for me.
Yeah. Interesting that you mentioned Newton and that he actually postulated something like that, because I was just looking, because of my interview with Alexander Wunsch, I was looking into the theory of colors and between Newton and Goethe. And so Newton, he had like a completely different way of thinking. He said like, okay, there's phenomena outside there. We have movement of matter, actually particles or something, they are colorless. And when they hit the human receptors, then this is going to be in the brain, translated into something. And Goethe says like, any science that doesn't take the perceiving individual, like the human being, into consideration is kind of not worth it, So for him, the quality of blue was already in us, otherwise we can't see it. So that's an interesting way, and I just hope that also the fourth phase of water is going to put the human being into the equation again, and not make it just a playground for all these micro and nano phenomena that we discover in the lab and that we can describe so eloquently.
I think it will, and one of the reasons why I think it will is I think that easy water is the substrate for information. And see, most people will discard the concept that water could retain or receive or even emit information. despite the fact that there's huge evidence in favor of that, empirical evidence. And one of the reasons that why it's discarded is the idea that water consists of randomly oriented molecules moving around at a furious rate. There's no way that information could be stored. But you see, if you have EZ water, which is a crystal, crystals can store information. And in the case of EZ water, which is basically a three-dimensional array of oxygens and hydrogens, if you could affect, let's say, one of those oxygens of many in some way, just like in a computer memory, you can affect a molecule of silicon. You can either have one state, like 0 or 1, or another state. The same thing can exist in the EZ water if you transform an oxygen from one state to another state. Well, it turns out that with oxygen, it's possible that each oxygen atom contains 5 possible states. And the reason is that the oxygen can retain different oxidation states, and the typical one of -2 that we know about, but also chemists know that there's also -1, 0, +1, and +2. So imagine if each point in a three-dimensional array can take on not 2, but 5 different states. And you have so many of these entities in the array. The memory capacity of a given volume of EZ water, I think calculated a couple of years ago, I think it's something like 10 or 100 billion times the capacity that we now have with silicon. So, and this is very important. As I said, there's not only does EZ water have the capacity to store information, but also the capacity is enormous. And so it may be possible one day that EZ water will replace silicon as in your thumb drive or or whatever.
Yeah. So the structural capacity is there, and also photons can store tons of information. Can actually EZ water store photons, or where is there actually are they retaining some photons, or is there any?
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. So depends on the wavelength of the photon. So some wavelength photons build EZ water, create more of it, and other photons. We have preliminary evidence, not definitive, that some wavelength photons can increase the amount of charge in EZ water, that is in the ultraviolet range. So yeah, and all kinds of electromagnetic energy. This has not been pursued, but I'm sure it will be. Different wavelengths of light. The spectrum is just huge. We think of light as the visible spectrum. It's a very tiny fraction of the entire spectrum of electromagnetic energy. And we, nor others, have tried other wavelengths along the spectrum, but we don't know what other kinds of energy might be responsible not only for building this EZ, but also for imparting energy. We see the EZ as a kind of generic structure which can be modified by electromagnetic energy, probably other kinds of energy. So this opens an entirely new, what you might say, practical realm. Practical also for health.
Yeah, and it also opens maybe the realm for like a different view of how things are working, and moving a little bit away from that kind of mechanical view that we have on us, how the world actually works, and puts the focus more on energy, light, water, and these things. Jerry, I really want to respect your time. Maybe as a last question, what are you working on right now? What's the future of EZ water? What do you got in your mind right now?
So many things. Well, the information is really important. Right now, some of the experiments involve magnets, and it seems that magnets have a surprising effect on water, and some of that effect is on EZ. North Pole and South Pole exert different effects, and the major underlying theme is to try to figure out exactly how this and memory are created, because it seems that they must be so important in the functioning of the cell. That is, the distribution of information in a muscle cell and a brain cell are probably going to be quite a bit different. And we want to know, we want to know details, and we want to know how exactly that energy can be changed. And so this is one of the subjects that interests us a whole lot. And it's a real challenge, because we don't yet have a specific enough hypothesis to get there. Also, there are practical things that we're trying to develop. As I said, our company is fairly recently formed, and we're looking for more investment to develop some of these ideas that stem from the basic science, to build them in a practical way for the world, because the world is badly in need of energy, a renewable energy, and it's badly in need of producing water that is free of all the poisons and pharmaceuticals and such that we drink every day. And there are effective filters like reverse osmosis, but these filters use huge amounts of energy, and only those energy-rich countries can afford to, like Saudi Arabia, for example, to use it. And the way we do it is to actually pull out the easy water, which is practically solute-free or particle-free. It gets rid of the bacteria, whatever. But trying to do this in an effective and practical way requires a lot of technological development. So we'd like to make that available for the world. And so those are a couple of the areas. I've got another book coming out that deals with this is less experimentation and more thinking, although some experiments, and it deals with subjects like what's the nature of gravitation, why does the Earth spin on its axis, how do birds really fly, what makes weather. So there's a lot of stuff, and you might imagine that the concepts that are brought forth don't necessarily follow the mainstream views, and I'm excited about that. So whenever I have a bit of spare time, I progress with that book. I hope it will be out within a year.
Amazing. And I hope we will get the German translation. I mean, I can read it in English, but not everybody can. By the way, I'm going to make kind of a short translation from this episode, so only German-speaking Germans can actually listen to this also. Okay. Jerry, that's amazing. I mean, your new projects, you're going to try to solve two of the biggest problems we actually have in the world. I mean, not any less than that. So I think your discovery has huge implications and really opens my mind. And I only hope that it opens the mind of so many people, and that there will be things developing out of that we can't even imagine right now.
Well, thank you, Unkas. I think so too. I really think that this is so central, and it uncovers a whole lot of new principles of physics and chemistry that I think could be really, really useful. So, and thank you for being such a great interviewer. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
It makes a big difference. I'm not sure if we're online or offline, but if you can,
still online.
If you could send me that Hachanai, or the fellow Hackney.
Hachanai, yeah.
Is there anything in English that you?
No, that's the thing. It's everything in German, but I can.
No, I don't want to put you to work. No, you don't have to translate anything.
I can just because I'm going to Indonesia tomorrow, and I'm going to take one of his books, and I'm going to give you some excerpts. I send them to you.
Thank you.
Put them in a translator, and just to give you an idea of what's going on there and what he has been writing 20 years ago. Or I don't know when.
Yeah, especially about his idea of a fourth phase that's electric. That would be really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, he just mentioned that his work was about levitation and like a new physics of levitation, stuff like that.
Oh, that's of central interest to me. It's part of my new book, also, Levitation.
Goodness.
I think this is a guy I should read. I should probably learn German just to read his book.
The thing is, you can like scan it and then put it into a translator, and maybe get some use of it.
Is he still around, or is he?
No, he's dead. I wanted to get his son on the show, but he's not responding to me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Mr. Friedrich Hachener, if you listen to me, come into my show.
We're deeply interested. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so thank you very much. Let's keep in touch. I sent you some of the stuff, and it was a big pleasure for me, and you made my day really, really great today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Likewise. The reverse is true as well. Okay, Ankas, take care.
Take care. Bye.